The aroma of roasted chicken filled our cozy kitchen as I moved about, setting the table with care. I loved these small rituals, the little details that transformed an ordinary dinner into something special. "Hey, Mark," I called out, glancing over my shoulder to see him lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Could you grab the wine from the fridge? I think a nice Chardonnay would pair perfectly with dinner." "Sure thing, babe," he replied, his voice warm and familiar. I watched him get up, a sense of contentment washing over me. Mark was my rock, and our life together felt so solid, so right. I set the last fork down, admiring the table I had arranged. Fresh flowers from the garden added a pop of color, and I felt a swell of pride. "Did you talk to Jake today?" I asked, transitioning to a topic that always brought a smile to my face. Jake was not just Mark's best friend. He was a part of our family. "Yeah, I mentioned we were having dinner. He'll be here in about half an hour," Mark said, his eyes lighting up. "You know how much he loves your cooking." I chuckled, feeling a little blush creep up my cheeks. "Well, I hope he's prepared for my culinary masterpiece tonight," I teased, pretending to flick my hair back dramatically. Mark laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. "If anyone can make roasted chicken sound fancy, it's you, Sarah." As I brought the salad to the table, I felt a flutter of excitement at the thought of Jake arriving. We had shared countless dinners, laughter, and late-night talks. He had been there through ups and downs, and our friendship felt like an extension of our marriage. Yet, there was something different about tonight. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but my heart raced a little faster at the thought of him. A knock at the door broke me from my thoughts. "That must be him," I exclaimed, practically bouncing on my feet. I opened the door to find Jake standing there, his tool belt slung across his shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. "Hey, beautiful," he greeted, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "I brought the special tool for that repair you mentioned." "Thank you. You're a lifesaver," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. I noticed the way he looked at me, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than usual. It sent an unexpected thrill coursing through me. Mark appeared from the kitchen, and they exchanged their usual banter. "What's up, man? Ready to get your hands dirty?" Mark said, clapping Jake on the back. "Oh, you know me. Always up for a little DIY adventure," Jake replied, chuckling. I watched as they moved to the living room, where the repair awaited. There was an easy camaraderie between them, the kind that made me feel grateful for our friendships. As Jake set to work, I busied myself in the kitchen, sneaking glances at him. The way he concentrated, furrowing his brow, was oddly captivating. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the strange fluttering feeling in my stomach. It was just Jake, my friend. "Sarah, you should come take a look at this," Jake called out, pulling me from my thoughts. I approached, noticing how close he was to me as he pointed at something on the wall. Our shoulders brushed, and I felt a jolt of awareness that was both electrifying and confusing. "Looks great. You always know how to make things look easy," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice, trying to ignore the way my heart raced. Jake smirked. "Well, it helps when you have the right tools and the right company." He nudged me playfully. I laughed, but there was something in his tone, a casual flirtation that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're just saying that to get on my good side," I teased back, though a part of me reveled in the attention. "Maybe," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "But you really are the glue in this friendship, Sarah. You keep us all together." I felt a rush of warmth at his words, a mix of flattery and confusion. The air between us seemed to thicken, and I couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too. Just then, Mark called from the kitchen, breaking the moment. "Hey, you two, dinner's ready." The tension dissipated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the air. As we gathered around the table, laughter and conversation flowed easily, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What was happening between Jake and me? And more importantly, what did it mean for my marriage? The questions lingered like an uninvited guest, leaving me unsettled as we clinked glasses and shared stories, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. The evening wore on, and the laughter echoed in our cozy living room. I poured another glass of wine, trying to drown out the fluttering sensations in my stomach. Jake leaned back against the couch, his gaze flickering between Mark and me, and I couldn't help but notice the way he seemed to linger on me just a bit longer. Each time our eyes met, a spark ignited within me, making it difficult to concentrate on anything else. "Sarah, you've outdone yourself with dinner tonight," Jake said, his voice smooth and teasing. "I think I've gained 5 pounds just from smelling it." Mark chuckled, nudging Jake playfully. "You're such a drama queen. It was just pasta." "Yeah, but it's Sarah's pasta," Jake shot back, grinning. "Her cooking is practically a work of art." The way he said my name sent a thrill coursing through me, and I felt my cheeks heat up. "You guys are too much," I replied, trying to mask the embarrassment creeping over me. "It's just dinner." As the night progressed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. I noticed how Jake leaned in closer when he spoke to me, his shoulder brushing against mine. With every small touch, the air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of us dared to acknowledge. I stole glances at him when I thought he wasn't looking, trying to decipher the emotions swirling in his dark eyes. Was it simply friendship, or was there something deeper lurking beneath the surface? "Hey, Sarah," Jake said suddenly, breaking my reverie. "You look really beautiful tonight. That dress is perfect on you." The compliment hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I felt my heart race. "Thanks, Jake. You're just saying that." "No, I mean it," he insisted, his expression earnest. "You've always had this way of lighting up a room. It's one of the things I admire about you." His gaze held mine, and I could feel my breath quickening. The warmth of his words wrapped around me like a soft blanket, igniting a spark of excitement I had never felt before. Just then, Mark excused himself to step outside for a moment, and I felt a jolt of anticipation surge through me. Before I could even process what was happening, Jake turned to me with a more serious expression. "You know, Sarah, I can't help but think how incredible you are. Sometimes I wonder if Mark realizes just how lucky he is." The words hung heavy between us, and I could feel the electric charge intensifying. "Jake, honestly, it's hard to imagine anyone else being as perfect for him as you are," he continued, his eyes piercing into mine. But sometimes I feel like there's something more between us, don't you? My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, the room felt suffocating. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was imagining things, but the truth curled within me like a vine, choking my resolve. Our eyes locked, and the world around us faded away. It was just Jake and me, suspended in this moment that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "What do you mean by more?" I managed to whisper, feeling a rush of vulnerability wash over me. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I feel a connection with you that's hard to ignore." I opened my mouth to respond, but just then, Mark walked back in, his jovial demeanor breaking the fragile tension. "What are you two plotting over here?" he joked, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "Just talking about how we should paint the living room," Jake replied quickly, his voice casual, but I could sense the underlying tension in his words. "Sounds like a plan," Mark said, returning to his seat. I forced a smile, my mind racing with the thrill of our earlier exchange. I helped Jake with the repair as he continued to work on the project, our hands brushing against each other with every movement. The innocent contact sent jolts of electricity through me, each brush igniting a longing I couldn't quite comprehend. "Careful, don't want to break anything," I teased, trying to keep the atmosphere light, but my heart was pounding. "Don't worry, I've got it under control," he replied, his voice low, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if he could hear the wild thumping of my heart. As the evening drew to a close, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had shifted between us. The boundary separating friendship from something more had blurred, and I was left standing at the edge of an emotional precipice, my mind swirling with questions. Was I ready to leap into the unknown? Would I be willing to risk everything for a connection that felt so intoxicating, yet so forbidden? The following week, I found myself fidgeting with excitement as I set up for movie night. Mark had arranged everything, from the popcorn to the cozy blankets, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I knew Jake was coming over again, and the electric charge that lingered between us from our last encounter hung in the air like a thick fog. I glanced in the hallway mirror, adjusting my hair, a flutter of nerves dancing in my stomach. What was happening to me? When Jake finally arrived, he stepped through the door with that familiar, easy smile that always made my heart skip. "Hey, Sarah, ready for a cinematic masterpiece?" he joked, holding up a DVD that I recognized as one of my guilty pleasures. "Only if you promise not to mock my taste in movies," I replied, laughing lightly. I tried to keep my tone light, but there was a weight in my chest, a tension that seemed to thicken the air around us. As the movie played, I found myself stealing glances at Jake more often than I should have. He looked effortlessly charming in his casual attire, the way he leaned back on the couch, a bowl of popcorn resting on his lap. Every laugh he let out seemed to resonate deeply within me, pulling me closer to him. I tried to focus on the film, but my mind kept drifting to the moments we'd shared last week, the fleeting touches, the lingering gazes. "Can you believe this plot twist?" Jake exclaimed during a particularly dramatic scene, turning to me with an animated expression. Our legs brushed against each other, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I mean, who didn't see that coming? Honestly, I was too busy wondering if you were going to steal my popcorn, I teased, trying to play it cool, but the closeness was intoxicating. The tension between us felt palpable, like a live wire waiting to snap. As the movie reached its climax, I could hardly contain my breath. The atmosphere shifted, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world outside ceased to exist. Jake instinctively leaned closer, our shoulders touching, and my heart raced uncontrollably. I wanted to turn to him, to bask in the heat of his presence, but fear of crossing an unspoken line held me back. After the movie ended, the room fell into a comfortable silence, the credits rolling in the background. I stood up to stretch, trying to shake off the intensity of the moment, but Jake's laughter echoed behind me. You know, you have the most interesting taste in films. I'm still trying to process that ending. Hey, don't knock it. It has its charm, I shot back, half-heartedly defending my choice, but my voice trailed off as our banter faded into a deeper silence. We both lingered in the kitchen, washing the remnants of our popcorn feast, and the air thickened with unspoken words. Sarah, Jake began, his voice low and teasing. Do you always make a mess when you watch movies? Or is it just for my benefit? He flashed a grin, but there was something more in his eyes, an intensity that made my heart race. I chuckled nervously. Maybe it's just you. You bring out the clumsy side of me. I turned to meet his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the room felt charged. The warmth of his body was intoxicatingly close, and I felt an irresistible urge to lean in, to close the distance that separated us. Maybe I should come over more often then, he said, his tone playful yet serious. My breath caught in my throat, and the air around us grew still. In that moment, I was acutely aware of everything. The way the light flickered off his skin, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his eyes seemed to search mine for something deeper. My heart thudded loudly, drowning out the rational thoughts that screamed at me to step back, to remember the boundaries. Jake, I started, but the words caught in my throat. The laughter that had filled the air moments before faded to a whisper, leaving only the sound of our breathing. I felt a primal urge to bridge the gap between us, to surrender to the undeniable chemistry that crackled in the space. My heart raced, my mind raced, and in that charged moment, I found myself teetering on the edge of something dangerous, yet exhilarating. The air in the kitchen was thick with unspoken tension. Jake stood just a few inches away, his presence a magnetic force drawing me in. I could hardly breathe as he brushed a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips grazing my skin, sending shivers down my spine. Time seemed to slow in that moment, the world outside fading away. I bit my lip, my heart racing as I pulled back, feeling torn between the warmth of his touch and the sanctity of my marriage. Sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. Didn't mean to make things awkward. Awkward? I echoed, forcing a laugh that felt foreign in my throat. No, not at all. Just unexpected. I turned away, trying to gather my thoughts, but my heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. How had we gotten to this point? What had started as innocent flirtation had twisted into something far more complicated. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, a stark reminder of Mark, my steadfast husband, who trusted me completely. Later that evening, I found myself on the phone with Emma, my best friend, pouring out my heart. I don't know what to do, Emma. It's like I'm living in a dream that's turning into a nightmare. What do you mean? She asked, her tone serious. Is it Jake? Yeah, I admitted. I can't stop thinking about him. It's not just friendship anymore. I feel drawn to him. It's like I'm breaking some unspoken rule and it terrifies me. Sarah, you need to be careful, Emma warned, her voice steady yet filled with concern. This could ruin everything. Your marriage, your friendship with Jake. Everything could fall apart. I know. But it's like there's this electricity between us. I can't explain it. I've never felt this way about anyone besides Mark, I confessed, my fingers nervously twisting the phone cord. Just think about the consequences, Emma urged. What would Mark say if he found out? Or worse, what if Jake falls for you and things get messy? Her words struck a chord deep within me, but despite the warnings, I couldn't shake the thrill that ignited my senses. The idea of being with Jake felt exhilarating, like a forbidden fruit I yearned to taste. I hung up the phone, my mind racing with possibilities. The next day, I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought. The sun was shining brightly, yet my heart felt heavy. I thought about inviting Jake over for another repair project, a flimsy excuse to see him without Mark around. My pulse quickened at the idea, a mix of anticipation and dread swirling within me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts, but they clung stubbornly. What was I doing? I was married, and yet I felt this magnetic pull towards Jake that was impossible to ignore. The thrill of secrecy and the allure of the forbidden were intoxicating, and I found myself daydreaming about what could happen if I let go of my inhibitions. As I paced the living room, my mind raced with scenarios. What if he kissed me? What if I kissed him first? The possibilities felt both exciting and terrifying. I finally reached for my phone, my hands shaking slightly as I typed a message to Jake. Hey, can you come over later? I could use your help with something around the house, I wrote, pressing send before I could change my mind. The reply came almost instantly. Sure. What time? Say around 3, I typed back. My heart raced as I hit send again, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through me. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but the thought of seeing Jake alone sent a thrill through me that I couldn't deny. As the clock ticked closer to 3, my stomach filled with butterflies. I hurriedly cleaned up the house, trying to distract myself from the thoughts swirling in my head. Each passing minute felt like an eternity, and I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when Jake arrived. Would we be able to keep things friendly? Or was the air thick enough with tension to ignite a spark between us? When I heard the knock at the door, my heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the door to find Jake standing there, a casual smile on his face. The moment our eyes met, I felt that familiar electric charge, and I knew in that instant that there was no turning back. The moment Jake stepped through the door, I felt the air change, thickening with an unspoken tension that seemed to wrap around us like a heavy blanket. I tried to shake off the sensation, forcing a smile as I greeted him, "Hey, Jake, ready to tackle that repair?" "Absolutely," he replied, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "What's the plan, boss?" I led him into the living room, where the remnants of our last gathering still lingered. The couch was slightly askew, leftover popcorn nestled in the cushions, remnants of laughter and camaraderie. As we settled into our roles, the playful banter began to flow easily between us, just as it always had. But this time, every brush of our hands sent an electric jolt through me, igniting a fire that I desperately wanted to extinguish, yet couldn't ignore. "Can you hand me that screwdriver?" Jake asked, gesturing toward the tool belt I had laid out. As I reached for it, our fingers grazed, and a shiver ran down my spine. "You know, Sarah, I've always thought you have a knack for this kind of stuff. You're like the glue that holds everything together." I chuckled, trying to play it off, but my heart raced at his words. "Just trying to keep the house from falling apart," I replied, my voice a little breathless. I could feel his gaze on me, the way it lingered just a moment too long. We continued working, the light-hearted atmosphere slowly shifting into something more intimate. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in around us, and I found myself hyper-aware of every little movement. I glanced at Jake, noticing how his shirt hugged his arms just right, the subtle strength in his posture. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, as he tightened a bolt, he turned to me, his expression serious. "You know, I've always had feelings for you, Sarah." My stomach dropped, a mix of exhilaration and guilt flooding through me. I didn't want to ruin our friendship, but it's hard to ignore. His admission hung in the air, heavy with unspoken words. "Jake, I stammered, my thoughts racing. Guilt surged within me, a tidal wave threatening to drown out the thrill of his confession. I thought of Mark, of the commitment we had built together, and my heart ached with the weight of betrayal. "Look, I know this is complicated," Jake continued, stepping closer, his voice low and earnest. "But I can't pretend anymore. There's something between us, and it's real." Every fiber of my being screamed for me to step away, to put an end to this madness. Yet, I was drawn to him in a way that felt primal. "Jake, we shouldn't," I whispered, but my voice faltered as I felt the magnetic pull between us intensify. In that moment, the line between friendship and desire blurred beyond recognition. I could feel my heart racing, the heat rising between us, and before I could think rationally, I found myself leaning in. Our lips met in a heated kiss, a collision of pent-up emotions and desires that shattered the boundaries we had once held sacred. Panic surged through me as I pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed. "What have we done?" I gasped, the gravity of our actions crashing down on me like a wave. The thrill I had felt moments before was now tainted with fear. Jake's expression mirrored my turmoil. "I didn't want it to happen like this," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, clearly shaken. "But it felt right, didn't it?" I shook my head, tears brimming in my eyes. "Right or wrong, we crossed a line, Jake. This could ruin everything." My thoughts spiraled as I envisioned the consequences. Mark's face, the betrayal in his eyes, and the unraveling of the life we had built together. As the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I felt a sense of impending doom envelop me. The exhilaration of the kiss faded, leaving only a chilling realization. There was no going back now, and I was standing on the precipice of a choice that could change everything. "Sarah, we need to talk about this," Jake urged, his voice filled with a mix of concern and desperation. But all I could think about was the impending fallout, the betrayal I had committed, and the loyalty I had shattered. The laughter and lightheartedness of earlier were gone, replaced by the heavy weight of reality pressing down upon us. The days that followed the kiss were a whirlwind of confusion and guilt, each moment steeped in a tension that clung to me like a second skin. I moved through my routine on autopilot, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy. Mark, ever perceptive, must have sensed the shift in my demeanor. He would glance at me over breakfast, his brow furrowed in concern. But I deflected his inquiries with practiced ease, offering a smile that felt more like a mask than a reflection of my true self. "Are you okay, Sarah?" he asked one morning, his voice tinged with worry as he poured himself another cup of coffee. I could see the concern in his eyes, the way he searched mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. "Just a little tired, I guess. You know how it is," I replied, my heart racing at the thought of what lay beneath the surface of my smile. I could hear the echo of Jake's confession replaying in my mind, feel the ghost of that kiss lingering on my lips, and it made my stomach twist in knots. "All right," he said, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. He reached out, brushing his fingers against my hand, and I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. How could I betray him like this? Yet, the memory of Jake's lips on mine ignited a conflicting flame of desire within me, one that I was struggling to extinguish. Later that week, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, rehearsing what I would say to Jake. I needed to regain control, to put some distance between us before things spiraled out of hand. I texted him, suggesting we meet. My heart raced as I waited for his response, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation coursing through me. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted Jake sitting at a corner table, his expression a mix of apprehension and excitement. As I approached, I could feel the air crackle between us, an electric charge that both thrilled and terrified me. "Hey," he said, his voice low as he gestured for me to sit. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the world around us faded away. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile despite the weight on my chest. "We need to talk about, what happened." "Yeah, I was hoping we could," Jake said, leaning in slightly, his intensity making it hard to focus on anything but him. I didn't mean to cross any lines, but it happened, I interrupted, my heart racing. "And we need to set some boundaries before this goes any further." He nodded slowly, his expression somber. "I agree. It was impulsive, and I don't want to ruin what we have. You mean too much to me." "But we can't keep pretending those feelings don't exist," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It'll just make everything more complicated." "I know," Jake replied, his gaze unwavering, "but it doesn't have to be the end. Let's just take a step back. No more kisses, no more flirty comments, just friends." I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest intensifying. "Yeah, friends," I echoed, though the word felt heavy on my tongue. As we parted ways that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss that washed over me. Just as I thought I could move on, I received an anonymous text. My heart dropped as I read the words. I saw you and Jake. It won't stay a secret for long. Dread pooled in my stomach, and I felt the walls closing in on me. Before I could process the implications of the message, my phone buzzed again. It was Mark. Can we talk? It's important. Panic surged through me as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I was standing at a crossroads, my heart pounding in my chest as I contemplated the impending confrontation. What would I say? How could I explain the unexplainable? The weight of my choices pressed down on me, and I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, ready to plunge into the unknown. With every fiber of my being, I wanted to turn back time, to erase that kiss and the chaos that followed. But reality surged forward, relentless and unforgiving. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the storm that was about to unfold.